So great to see you again, George.
And you?
And first thing I want to ask is, why after Bradford West did you decide to run for Mayor of London?
Actually, I decided I wanted to be Mayor of London before the position actually existed. I think that the job is so big, so powerful, and so important that it's an honour to run for it. I've lived in London for almost 35 years. My children have been born here, grown up here, go to school. Even my grandchildren are born here and growing up and going to school here. So I really feel that this is the greatest city in the world, but it's not great for everybody in it.
No.
It's considerably greater for people that Boris Johnson represents, the rich and the powerful, those, as I put it, dripping in gold. But for the rest, it's a bit of a struggle. And of course, if you're in a wonderful city but you don't have the means to enjoy it, to have proper housing within it, to get from A to B on a decent public transport system within it, then it begins to lose its luster a little.
An interesting proposal you made was that if Diane Abbott won the nomination, you wouldn't have stood. I just wondered why that was.
Because Diane Abbott is a friend of mine, a comrade of mine for well over 30 years. If Labour had selected her, and they would have been wise to do so, it would have been ridiculous for me to run against her. I wouldn't have been able to look her in the eye and do that. So I made it clear, quite a time before Labour chose its candidate, that if she were the nominee, I wouldn't be in the field. But she went out early, and they've chosen instead someone who, frankly, is not of her stature.
But just wondering as well, because Sadiq Khan, he nominated Jeremy Corbyn, and so did Diane Abbott. So what separates the two, in your opinion?
Well, I knew that Sadiq Khan would do exactly what he has done. That's why we know him as Mr. Flip-Flop. He nominated Jeremy Corbyn, but he didn't vote for him. He publicly announced on LBC radio that he would refuse to serve in his shadow cabinet. And within a week, I think, maybe 8 days of being selected as the Labour nominee for mayor, he laid into both Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell in the most virulent terms, creating several very painful rods for their back in the future, and an indication of his own conduct vis-à-vis them in the future. He tells us every day, usually in the most unlikely places, that he is not Ken Livingstone. Well, actually, he definitely isn't Ken Livingstone.
Like in the Spectator.
Yes, in right-wing newspapers of all kinds. But he tells us every day that he's not going to be Jeremy Corbyn's man in London, that he's going to stand up to Jeremy Corbyn, that on some very powerful and important issues he agrees with Boris Johnson rather than Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. For example, the so-called Robin Hood tax on financial transactions in the city, which would raise a gigantic amount of revenue, hundreds of billions of pounds, that could be available to a Labour government for social projects, public infrastructure and so on. He's opposed to it, and he's going to defend the city against Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell on the Robin Hood tax. But the most vile thing that he did, within 8 days of being selected, he accused Jeremy Corbyn of encouraging anti-Semitism and terrorism because of his stand for Palestinian rights and for Irish rights more historically. And he threw in John McDonnell too. So he set the hair running from the Labour mayoral candidate that the Labour leader and Labour shadow chancellor were anti-Semitic encouragers of terrorism. Doesn't get much more serious than that. I joked at the time, what do you have to do to get expelled out of the Labour Party nowadays? It wasn't like that in my time.
Yeah, so obviously you were expelled because of your position on Iraq.
Yes, and if ever a stand has been vindicated, my stand on Iraq is not now contested by any serious person.
And do you always put principles before, your career in politics?
Always.
Before the party?
I never regarded politics as being a career, and now, by the grace of God and by hard work and some good luck, I don't actually depend on politics. I don't depend on anyone else. I'm genuinely an independent person. I could walk away from standing for political office and so on and live a very, very good life. And therefore that makes me a free man. They call me a maverick, but the definition of a maverick is merely a beast that isn't owned by anyone. Well, I'll own up to that. I'm not owned by anyone. I'm free to take the decisions that I think are correct, to say what I believe in, and believe what I say.
You've got really high social media statistics. You've got over, I think it's almost twice as many as all the other candidates. As Twitter followers, Facebook likes. But one of the difficult parts of your campaign might be actual funds and also members. So how are you planning to get around that so you can...
Well, I think that's an accurate summary. I have around 1 million followers on social media. That's a very, very big reach and can make up for a lack of funds and a lack of members, a lack of a party machine to a certain extent. Our campaign is actually growing in terms of numbers, and we'll very soon have an open-top double-decker bus specially decorated for the campaign on the streets of London, with me, a well-known, recognisable figure, standing on top with a megaphone, or a proper microphone.
Is that the same bus that you used for Bradford?
It's not, because that bus is not London-proofed because of the Ken Livingstone's emissions policy. A bus that is as dirty in its exhaust as that one cannot come into London. So we've swapped it for another that is London-proof, and it will be a joy to behold. And thus, hundreds of thousands, or millions actually, will, over the next 90-odd days, will see this bus, get the message, and know that I'm standing. Funds is a problem. I'm basically paying for this campaign myself. But again, that's beginning to gather momentum. So we've got the bus, we've got a headquarters, we've got a very high social media profile, and crucially, the public hustings are now beginning. And the most important one is next Wednesday, the Evening Standard, London's main newspaper, covered live on television and on radio, a debate between me and Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith. How do you think that's going to go? So I intend to take command of those proceedings.
Just touching on democracy and also the hustings, you weren't actually allowed to take part in the London School of Economics hustings just the other day, and so was an independent candidate and a few others actually. How do you think democracy could be improved, and what do you think to the...
Well, the others are scared to debate with me, and that's why, where they can, they muscle the organisers into trying to refuse me. That's arguably illegal under the Representation of the People's Act. Certainly will be once we get closer to the polls. But the Evening Standard's too big to muscle, and therefore they've told them to get lost, that I'm appearing. I'm the third favourite in the bookmakers by a very, very long way, 25 to 1 for me, 150 to 1 for UKIP. Yet UKIP, of all people, are on a platform in the London School of Economics. I say of all people, though, of course, Colonel Gaddafi's son was also given a platform at the London School of Economics, though that may have had something to do with the donation of millions of pounds by the dictator to the LSE. Maybe if I'd promised the LSE a bung, I might have got a place on their hustings.
Maybe. So I just wondered, how are you going to tackle the housing crisis, and how does your policies for the housing crisis separate you from the other candidates like Sadiq, Zach?
Well, Sadiq Khan has received £100,000 in donations from property developers, so that probably tells you something about his policy towards the housing crisis. No property developer would ever dream of donating any money to my campaign, because life's going to get much tougher for property developers if I'm the mayor. The mayor has the power to decide whether a development can go ahead or not. So I'm very clear about it. Unless a development has 50% affordable housing, and the definition of affordable for me is that the rent should be 50% of the prevailing rents in the area, as opposed to 80% under Boris Johnson's definition of affordability, and Zach Goldsmith won't even make a definition. Of course, when you're the heir to a £700 million personal trust fund, you don't have to worry about affordability very much. I'm going to compulsorily purchase any house that's left empty in London for a year or more without a good excuse, without a valid excuse, because hundreds of thousands of houses in London have been bought not as houses at all, but as cash deposit boxes, safety deposit boxes. Usually foreigners, sometimes crooked, bringing their money here and parking it in property in London with no intention whatsoever of living in it or even renting it out to anyone else, just to allow it to continually appreciate in capital value. That drives up rents, drives up prices, and means that fewer and fewer Londoners can dream of getting a house in the place that they perhaps were born, or the place that they live, that they work and have to live, otherwise commute long distances on inadequate public transport. It's a crisis. People are being pushed to the periphery and even outside. I mean, there are people who were living in London but who now live in Southend or other places on the coast and who have to travel into London to work, and we need them to travel into London to work. Otherwise, London would seize up. I'm going to fight for Berlin-style rent controls. I've got all kinds of policies to deal with this. The most important message to Londoners is trust. You know me, you know what I stand for, you know how I do my work. Do you think I'll deal with this crisis more decisively in your interest, or do you think the others will? I think just to ask that question is to answer it.
Have you had any donations or from property developers or?
I've had no donations from anybody, never mind property developers. I and my friends are running this campaign ourselves, using our own resources. I wouldn't accept any donations from any property developer. I wasn't an expenses cheat. Sadiq Khan was an expenses cheat. I'm not a tax dodger. Zach Goldsmith was a tax dodger, a non-dom, pretending that he actually didn't even live here but lived abroad.
For over a decade.
For over a decade. So if you're looking for a politician who's not like the rest, you've come to the right place.
There was a certain company that made a lot of money off the tube strikes, Uber, the largest taxi firm
in the world
that doesn't own any taxis.
Exactly.
So what is your plans for?
It's only an app, don't you know? It's only a telephone app.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, on the tube strikes, if I may, Boris Johnson caused these tube strikes. The workers in the London Underground are in favour of the night tube, but they have to be negotiated with. You have to take your workers with you. You can't just say, I'm going to dramatically change your life, but I'm not even going to negotiate it with you. If I was the mayor, of course, with my long background in the trade union movement, that kind of Rambo management would not happen. I'd be able to take the workforce and the unions with me. I'm going to run Uber out of town if I can. There are many places trying to do that in New Jersey, in parts of California, in Delhi, in many parts of the world. In Paris right now, the streets are clogged with protesting taxi drivers, protesting about the Uber, this multinational tax-dodging US $50 billion corporation that is seeking to destroy all competition, all regulation, all standards in order to establish hegemony in the private hire field. And if they ever achieved that, then they could charge what they like and they could pay their workers what they like. And if you want to deliver yourself into that good night, then you really ought to think twice.
How are you going to help these small, medium and large enterprises?
Well, Sadiq Khan boasts daily that he'll be the most pro-business mayor that London's ever had. That's to say more pro-business than Boris Johnson. Get your head around that for a minute. He's the Labour candidate.
Trying to outflank.
Yes.
Is that
well, look,
right?
if I'm the mayor, I'll be the most pro-worker mayor that there's ever been, and that's a pretty big difference between us. Business doesn't need a mayor. Rich and powerful people don't need a mayor. They're already rich and powerful. They've already got a Tory government with David Cameron and George Osborne running it. How much more does business need? It's the workers that need. It's the tenants that need. It's the people struggling to pay a mortgage and living in a community whose public services are being ruthlessly slashed and burned in the name of austerity. So all this hogwash about business just leaves me cold. I'm interested in small business. And I want to address, for example, the ludicrous situation we have that shops and small businesses are going out of business because if you stop outside their door for 2 minutes, you're caught on a camera and fined for having done so. This is driving businesses out of business. The black cab trade are all small businesses, 25,000 small businesses. By our policy towards Uber and the tearing up of all standards and regulation, there's 25,000 businesses rapidly going out of business. I'm in favour of developing small and medium-sized enterprises, but big business and the banks, they're already powerful enough. They don't need a mayor in their corner.
I heard you had a really interesting policy regarding these tax dodges for the City of London.
Well, I don't want to give everything away, certainly not too early, but my finance and economics czar in the parlance is Max Kaiser, the shock economist, who knows more about business and finance than almost anybody else in the world. He's the leading broadcaster on this subject across the whole world. He's the most watched broadcaster in the world, in fact. And he's working on some schemes by which we will ensure that people like Starbucks, Amazon, and Google do pay some of their share, because we can't leave that, we now know, to Osborne and Cameron, who are in bed with Google. The closeness of their relationship with Google is a national, international scandal, and the EU itself is now raising that point. I mean, for example, who picks up the trash? Who supplies the water? Who supplies the power? Who supplies the sewer underneath? Who provides the environment in which these companies are working? And if the answer to that is us, the public realm, well, maybe we'll have to do something in terms of charging in those regards. If I give the local Starbucks £1,000 a week bill for collecting their trash, that might be a wake-up call for them. Wake up and smell the coffee.
Yeah. Another major issue for Londoners, certainly in terms of health, is Heathrow expansion. I just wondered what your opinion is of that and what your policy is towards Heathrow expansion.
I'm against it, and I've always been against it, unlike Sadiq Khan, who's now against it, but actually, until a few months ago, was very strongly in favour of it. Indeed, was in the government that was pushing it. And this again indicates the complete lack of principle on the part of the Labour candidate. And rather alarmingly, he sounds as evangelical against it as he sounded when he was in favour of it. So either he's had some Damascene conversion, or more likely, he's decided that this is what he has to say in order to get elected. London's air quality is already disastrously bad. It's illegal in many parts of London. In those parts of London, children are dying as a result. And we can't have it. We can't have it anymore.
No.
And London Gatwick sounds Londonish to me. We can build a high-speed, environmentally friendly rail link between Heathrow and Gatwick, and nobody will notice the difference.
How you are going to try and get businesses to pay for London?
Well, if they don't pay it, they won't be doing any work for us. And by the time I came to office, the London living wage would be properly defined as £10 an hour. So if your workers are not receiving at least £10 an hour, don't bother applying for a contract with us. And if you've got one with us, it will be ended as soon as it's legally possible to do so. Workers will keep their tips in London, as opposed to having their employer stealing them in restaurants and bars and so on, which happens widespread. Hundreds of thousands of workers are affected by this. I'll refuse to end check-off for the payment of trade union dues, even though the government has passed legislation to bring that about. I'm happy to fight that on their behalf. Workers will get a good deal with me, and having spent my whole life in the working class movement, I think there are many people who know that. On the transport thing, I don't know if you're aware, I'm going to give free transport for all students in London. So school students, college students, university students will all travel free on London transport if I'm the mayor.
Just touching on the free transport, obviously a lot of Londoners will wonder, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, Max Kaiser, who, as I say, will be running the finance and economic side of things, he's a big pioneer of cryptocurrency, and he has an idea every day of how we could use the mayoralty to make people's lives better, easier, in many cases cheaper. For example, everyone who sends money abroad, which in the case of London, if you think of all the minority ethnic communities, there are people sending right now money home to their old father in Nigeria, or their mother in Ireland, or their sister in Poland, or mothers and fathers are sending money to their kid on a gap year somewhere who can't get back to England because he or she needs money. If they do that, they're sending it through Western Union, or Western Union if they can afford it, because it'll cost you to send £2,000 through Western Union will cost you nearly £100 in fees. And if you're doing that regularly, that becomes a serious amount of money that you have lost. Or, more likely, for the poorer people, they're transferring money through dodgy money transfer businesses which go bust or the money never arrives. We're going to do it through Oyster technology, through the City Hall, which will become effectively a people's bank. So we've got lots of ideas like that.
That's using the Oyster card.
The Oyster will become your world. You have no idea the things you're going to be able to do with the Oyster card if I become mayor. But it's another of the things I don't want to give. You see, every time I come up with a policy, Sadiq Khan steals it and calls it his own. So I'm waiting till nearer to the election to put some of these things on the table. But people will be excited when they see them. It's not tenable, to have a rush hour in the 21st century. There is no reason why people have to be at their desk at 9 a.m. They can, in many cases, work from home, as I myself do and many, many Londoners do. And you can plan your journey into work, especially in a 24-hour city where there's a night tube and so on. You can plan your working day, and your employer can negotiate changes to your working day to avoid a crush. Like, I don't know if you've been in the transport system in the rush hour, but a sardine is very lucky on the London Underground compared to the passengers that are paying top dollar for it. We've got the most expensive tube in the entire world, and yet the space at premium times is very, very difficult to get. So we stagger the day, we give key workers, police officers, fire services, ambulance workers, teachers, who can't afford to, this is the point, you see, they can't afford to live in London, but they have to work in London, and we need them to work in London. So if we can't provide the housing in the short term, we can certainly make it easier and cheaper for them to travel.
I just wondered what your plans are for tube fares.
Well, this is another of my policies that Sadiq Khan stole. You see the dangers. I was the first to say that there would be no increases during my mayoral term, which is a 4-year term, because there's been 40% of increase already in the last 8 years under Boris Johnson, whilst inflation has been practically at zero. So there's been enough increases in fares. I don't believe TfL's figures, and I'm going to save double what Sadiq Khan says he can save. We estimate that £1 billion in savings can be made in the existing budgets. Of course, I'll be fighting for greater powers and greater budgets for London. If we have to put fares up, if we have to, I'd rather do that and make specific concessions to specific groups than, if I had to choose, than freezing the fares for everybody. So to that extent, I'm prepared to be flexible. If we simply can't make the savings that will fund a freeze, then I think my policy of allowing students to go free, police, fire, ambulance workers, teachers, key hospital workers to go free is a better use of their resource.
Just touching on racism and discrimination in general, it seems to be an issue within the actual police force itself. I just wondered how are you going to tackle that issue?
Well, the Commissioner will not look forward to his Monday morning meetings with me because I'll be asking him to what extent the Metropolitan Police Force is colourblind. And I don't just mean blind to the colour of people's skin. I mean blind to the colour of their shirt collar. If you pick somebody's pocket in Liverpool Street Station, you'll be under arrest very quickly. But if you pick the bank's pocket of millions, you have virtually no chance of coming under arrest or of being convicted. If you steal £25, you're a thief. If you steal £250,000, you're an embezzler. If you steal £25 million, you're a corporation. And that has to stop. So I'll back the police. I'll fight for them. I'll fight for the resources. I'll fight for the equipment, including firearms, that they need. But I won't put up with racism, and I won't put up with prejudice or discrimination of any kind. And the police will know that.
Finally, the last question I want to ask is, why should Londoners vote for you?
It'll make a difference. If either of the others are elected, London will go to sleep for 4 years. They are the most boring duet that anyone has ever seen run for important political office in London. The only difference between them is that Zach Goldsmith is extremely tall, and Sadiq Khan is extremely small. But in every other respect, they are Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and they've got nothing to offer. The mass of Londoners, the millions, all of their policies are tailored towards what we call the 1%, the people already dripping in gold. I'll be the opposite. If I'm the mayor, it'll be exciting. It'll be exciting for me, it'll be exciting for Londoners. There'll never be a dull moment, that I can promise you.
Okay, thanks very much, George.
All the best.
Thanks.